In the crowded night market of Lagos, where smoke from street food grills mixed with the dust that drifted down every evening, a poor boy named Jakarta stood barefoot beside an old cemon cow well, holding a cracked guitar that looked almost as fragile as he was. The guitar wasn't really his. He had pulled it from a trash heap behind a broken shop 3 months earlier, after storms had ripped apart the wooden stalls. He remembered digging through the garbage with trembling hands, hoping to find food, but discovering the guitar instead. The strings were rusted, the wood chipped, and the sound uneven, but to him, it was the closest thing to magic he had ever touched. Life had never offered him comfort or protection, only the constant ache of hunger, long days sweeping the streets for a few coins, and the heavy silence of being invisible to people who passed by. But music was the one thing that made him feel alive. As the sun began to set, the lights of the market flickered on, creating a warm glow that stretched across the uneven ground. People from places like Istanbul, Reykjavik, Seoul, and Santiago wandered through the night market searching for souvenirs, food, or entertainment, completely unaware that a moment of unexpected beauty was about to unfold. Jakarta took a breath, looked up at the sky as if asking for strength, and then whispered the first lines of Hotel California. His voice was raw, untrained, unpolished, and cracked from years of shouting above traffic just to sell cheap trinkets. But the sound that floated from his throat carried a rare authenticity. It wasn't the voice of a choir singer or a performer trained in expensive studios. It was the voice of a boy who had lived through pain and still dared to hope. The first note drifted into the warm air, subtle and trembling like a tiny flame fighting against wind. Yet something about it made people stop. A group of tourists from Seoul froze, looking at each other as if asking, "Did you hear that?" A couple from Reykjavik turned around, stunned that such emotion could come from a barefoot boy beside a cemon cow well. Others began to approach slowly, pulled in by the unusual combination of vulnerability and power in his singing. Jakarta didn't notice them at first. His eyes were closed, his fingers struggling to glide across the rough strings, and his entire soul pouring into every note. His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked. It wavered. It stumbled. But it told the truth, and that truth carried more weight than any flawless performance ever could. There was dust in his tone, yes, but also courage. There was hunger, but also hope. And somehow, through the strength of his emotion, Hotel California transformed from a legendary rock classic into something new, something painfully real and mysteriously beautiful. It felt like the song had traveled through his struggles, picked up pieces of his life, and reshaped itself into pure magic. By the next morning, Jakarta's voice had already begun to travel farther than he ever could. A single tourist's video, recorded beside the same cemon cow well where he always stood, had exploded across social media overnight. So when the first rays of sunlight stretched across Lagos, the boy woke to something he had never expected: a crowd. Tourists from Berlin, New York, Dubai, Cairo, and Buenos Aires gathered in a loose circle around the well, whispering with excitement as though they were waiting for a celebrity. But when Jakarta walked toward them, barefoot, dusty, holding the same cracked guitar, many were surprised. They expected someone older, taller, polished. Instead, they saw a poor boy with tired eyes, but a fire inside them that refused to die. Some people handed him small coins, others gave encouraging smiles. But Jakarta didn't react the way most performers would. Poverty had carved deep instincts into him: distrust, hesitation, fear of hope. He looked at all the faces surrounding him with a frail uncertainty, as if convinced they might disappear the moment he strummed a chord. Still, they encouraged him. A traveler from Berlin nodded gently. A tourist from Dubai said, "Sing for us, Jakarta. Sing like you did last night." And after a long breath, the boy lifted the guitar into his arms. When he closed his eyes and began to sing Hotel California again, the transformation was instant. The noise of the marketplace, vendors shouting prices, buses rumbling through the streets, footsteps scattering across gravel, seemed to fade away. His voice didn't grow smoother or more professional. It stayed raw, textured, full of scars. But every note held weight. Every syllable sounded like it had been shaped by years of survival. As he reached the first chorus, his voice cracked, and the crowd reacted not with judgment, but with emotion. Some stepped closer, drawn in by a sound that felt almost like a confession. A woman from Cairo placed a hand over her heart. A man from New York whispered, "This kid, he's singing from somewhere real." Jakarta felt their eyes on him, felt their energy rising, and for a brief moment, the fear inside him softened. He wasn't just a poor boy beside a cemon cow well anymore. He was a storyteller, and the world was finally listening. As he continued, something remarkable happened. His voice grew stronger. Not because he was pushing harder, but because he sensed something he had never felt before: acceptance. People weren't just hearing him, they were feeling him. His struggles, his hunger, his quiet dreams, all of it poured into the melody, reshaping Hotel California into a deeply emotional experience. Some in the crowd wiped their eyes. Others recorded quietly, careful not to disturb the sacredness of the moment. By the time he hit the final note, Jakarta wasn't the same boy who had walked into the circle moments earlier. The applause that erupted around him was louder than anything he had ever heard in his life. It wasn't just clapping, it was recognition. It was hope. It was the world saying, "We see you." Within just a few days, Jakarta's performance had crossed borders faster than airplanes. The same video recorded beside the cemon cow well, the place where he spent most of his days begging for coins, began reaching homes in Toronto, Manila, London, Sydney, Johannesburg, and Rio de Janeiro. People around the world watched the clip and felt something they couldn't quite explain. They didn't just hear a song, they heard struggle, hope, and a kind of honesty that's almost impossible to find in the modern music world. Viewers paused their busy lives, rewound the moment where his voice cracked, and typed comments saying things like, "This boy made me cry." Others wrote, "I don't understand how someone with nothing can sing with so much soul." Jakarta didn't understand any of it. He didn't own a phone. He didn't know about views, shares, or algorithms. All he knew was hunger, survival, and the feeling of cold nights sleeping on cardboard near the markets. Even when people began arriving from far places, calling his name like he was someone important, he reacted with the same poor boy instinct: fear, confusion, and disbelief. He wasn't used to being seen. He wasn't used to anyone caring. So when strangers told him he was famous online, he simply stared back at them, unsure whether to trust their words or hide behind the well he'd known his whole life. But what made his story even more powerful was that the magic wasn't only in his voice, it was in the scene itself. The old cemon cow well became symbolic, a place that represented poverty and forgotten lives. And yet, that was the exact spot where something extraordinary happened. People online pointed out the contrast. The cracked stones of the well, the dusty roads of Lagos, the torn shirt on the boy's back, and then this unexpectedly angelic, emotional, raw performance rising from the middle of it all. It reminded the world that greatness doesn't need a stage. It can grow from the hardest soil. Celebrities from London and Sydney reshared the video. Radio hosts in Toronto played clips on air. Musicians in Johannesburg praised his natural, painful, beautiful tone. Jakarta became a symbol without even knowing it, proof that talent can come from anywhere, even from a boy who spent his life struggling for survival. People started raising money online, insisting that Jakarta deserved a real home, real meals, real education, and a real chance at a better life. But the purest moment of all remained unchanged in people's hearts. Jakarta standing barefoot beside the cemon cow well, his guitar cracked and fragile, his voice trembling with truth. That moment didn't need a studio, a microphone, or a spotlight. It was real, unedited, and unforgettable. He had nothing in his pockets, but for a few minutes, he held the entire world's attention. His raw voice didn't just sing Hotel California. It rebuilt it, filled it with new meaning, and turned it into living magic.